Welcome to our class. We are going to discuss Persian literature during the Delhi Sultanate today. The Delhi Sultans were very keen to patronize history writing. In fact, Muslims or the Turks were good record keepers. So they started the first systematic effort to write history, to record events. So this is very important. So we can categorize history writing into three groups. For example, there was official history, that is history writing that was directly being patronized by the sultans. Then we also have the diarists. These diarists were also patronized by the Delhi sultans. Then we also have some unconventional sources, because the official histories provide information mainly about political life, about battles, about dynasties. But if we also consult these unconventional sources such as Maktubat literature, Malfuzat literature.
So what is the relevance of this Malfuzat literature?
Yes, that's a very good question. Actually, I regard this Malfuzat and Maktubat literature as unconventional sources. Unconventional sources in the sense that this sort of literary endeavor was not directly patronized by the royal court. Malfuzat actually means, literally it means table talk. This recording is known as Malfuzat. It is frequently checked by the Sufi saint. These are important sources. Important sources in the sense because in official records we get reference to battles, political events, dynasties, but we don't get much information about contemporary society or contemporary culture. But Malfuzat literature provides important information about contemporary society and culture. So these are important sources. If you have to study the life and condition of the common people, you have to consult these unconventional sources which were being produced beyond the ambit of the royal court. And Maktubat literally means letters exchanged between Sufi saints. So these are important sources of contemporary social history or cultural history. There are also, apart from Persian sources, we shall just mention a few Arabic sources.
So excuse me sir, should we then also include the Arabic sources within our ambit of discussion?
It's a good question. Actually, we are not supposed to include the Arabic sources, but you have to understand that a translation movement was going on in that period. Major Arabic sources would be translated into Persian, and later on when the British came, many of their Indologists translated the Arabic sources into English, but not from the original Arabic sources. They mainly translated it from the Persian sources. So it proves that these major Arabic sources were translated into Persian during the Sultanate period. Actually, Persian became the language of diplomacy, it became the language of commerce, it also became the language of culture during the Sultanate period. In India, in Iran, in Central Asia, in Afghanistan, you will find this common language, that is Persian, which was in vogue. That's why Persian became very important as a language. So all the major Arabic works were translated into Persian, and later on the British Indologists relied on these Persian translations. That's why I will also include some, if not all, Arabic sources, because these Arabic sources will provide, they also provide important information about the Delhi Sultanate. I want to include some of them, such as Chachnama. It is dealing with the Arab invasion of Sindh during the early 8th century. It is written by an anonymous writer. And then Al-Biruni's Tahqiq-i-Hind is one important Arabic source that was later on translated into Persian. Al-Biruni was a gifted scholar. He was versatile. He learned Sanskrit. He was a good Sanskrit scholar as well. So if you read Tahqiq-i-Hind, which was originally available in the Arabic language, you will gather information about Indian society, caste system, sati, such evils in Indian society had been dealt with by Al-Biruni, and he tried to be impartial, and he provides important information about almost all aspects of Indian society, economy and polity. So this is an important source, and later on this was translated into Persian, and later on some scholars, Indologists, also relied on this Persian version. There was another source by the famous writer Urbi. He wrote Tariq-i-Yamani. Tariq means history, as you know. This was in Arabic, but later on it was also translated into Persian. It provides important information about the early phase of medieval Indian history. So Urbi's book is also important, which was later on translated into Persian. Then you have one famous book which was later on used as a model. Now this book was written in Persian. This was the famous Ghaznavid poet Firdausi Tusi, who wrote his famous Shahnama in the 11th century. This became a model because it had a broad canvas. It is replete with information about various sorts of activities, trade, commercial, economic activities, political activities and stuff. You get references to the movement of camels from India through Central Asia, through Persia to other countries. These camels would be carrying Indian merchandise. So Indian items are very popular in Central Asia and West Asia. For example, Indian steel was in great demand. If you read Shahnama, you will also get reference to Chinese porcelain, Chinese silk, which had been popular. So you get a broader trade map if you read this book, which included China, India, Central Asia, Persia, and other countries of Asia. So this is an important source material. We should also mention the classical Persian poet Sadi's famous work, Gulistan. Now, Gulistan also refers to these trade and commercial activities, this movement of camels, the trade items which India used to export, and the trade items which also India used to import. So in this way, these two major Persian works, one by Firdausi Tusi, Shahnama, and another by Sheikh Sadi Shirazi, these became role models because they had a large canvas and they discussed many aspects of medieval Indian society. There is another book, it is very important, that is the work by Hasan Nizami. Title of his work is Tajul Masir. So this work he started to write in Arabic. Interestingly, after some time, he quickly switched over to Persian. It confirms the fact that Persian was becoming a major language in this region, which also included India, Central Asia, West Asia, particularly Persia, and also Afghanistan. So he switched over to Persian. And this book also provides important information about the Delhi Sultanate. Actually, you can regard this book as the first historical narrative so far as the Delhi Sultanate is concerned. So this book is very famous in that sense. Now, we should also mention another gifted Persian writer who flourished in India, who was born in Patiali in modern UP and in the 13th century. He is no other than Amir Khusru.
So, was Amir Khusru a representative of India's composite culture?
It's a good question.
And sir, another question is, can we regard him as a Sufi poet?
He can be regarded as a Sufi poet, and he is, of course, a representative of the Indo-Muslim culture, Indo-Muslim composite culture. Actually, he had a mixed background. His maternal grandfather was a Rajput who embraced Islam, so he was very respectful towards Indian culture as well. And he also, though he flourished, he was patronized by the Delhi Sultans, but he was not thinking about the aristocrats. He was also thinking about the Indian people, Indian masses. So, for example, he used to travel a lot. He was a great traveler. So, he resembled the Kalandariya Sufis in that sense, because the Kalandariya Sufis used to move from place to place. Now, one thing important in this sort of traveling is that as you travel, you encounter diverse civilizations, and you are likely to be more flexible, more liberal towards other cultures and other civilizations if you carry out this sort of traveling. So he was a traveler, just like a Kalandariya Sufi saint. And his guru, his mentor, was no other than the famous, most illustrious Chishti Sufi saint of South Asia. He is Nizamuddin Aulia. So both of them died in the same year. They died in 1325 because after the death of his guru, Nizamuddin Aulia, he did not find life worth living. So he expired in the same year, that is 1325. So in this sense, he was definitively a Sufi poet, and he was a representative of Indo-Muslim culture. He wanted to bring about a fusion between the classical Persian language and the indigenous languages. He was a Sufi poet in the sense that when he was composing his Khamsa or his Diwans, he was known for his 5 Diwans that he wrote. He was very famous, one of the most gifted poets of in the Persian language of India during his lifetime. And still today, you will see that in the Qawwali musicians, that is the Sufi musicians, regard him as the doyen of Qawwali music, as the father of Qawwali music. So he was definitively a Sufi poet who used to say, just like any Sufi saint, he would just echo what Nizamuddin Auliya used to believe. I'm just telling it and then I will translate it for you. Man tu shudam, tu man shudi, man tan shudam, tu jan shudi, takas nagwed bad azi, man digaram tu digri. That is, I become thou, thou become I become the body, and thou become the soul. After that, no one can say that we are separated. And this is a reflection of the Sufi philosophy, which puts emphasis on this irresistible urge on the part of the devotee to be united with the Supreme Being or Allah. So, in this way, Amir Khusru should be regarded as one of the most famous writers. He may not be as great as Ziauddin Barani, who wrote Tariq-e-Firoz Shahi, may not be as great as Zia Barani as a historian, but he was sincere in his effort. He tried to be very truthful, whatever he undertook, but he was not a great or gifted historian, but he was definitively one of the greatest Persian poets of the Delhi Sultanate, and he was also emulated by his posterity. Now, in his writings, we gather historical information. For example, how the Kholjis used to fight battles, how the Tughlaqs used to fight battles. We get this sort of thing. And since he was patronized by several rulers, the Kholjis, the Tughlaqs used to patronize him, and he was all praised for them. For example, he celebrated the military victories of some of the Delhi sultans. So we have to be a little bit cautious when we read Amir Khusru, because since he was directly patronized by the Delhi sultans, he was all praised for them. Probably he became a little bit biased because for his sustenance, he relied on the Delhi sultans. Another great historian we should mention, who was exclusively writing in the Persian language, he was Minhaj-us-Siraj Juzjani. His book is Tabaqat-i-Nasir. It's a famous work. It's a sort of great history writing. He's exemplified in his endeavor. You get very important information about Delhi Sultanate in this book, about contemporary society, particularly contemporary political events, the court paraphernalias, the court rituals, the lives of the amirs and the aristocrats. You will get information about this. He brought within his ambit Central Asia, West Asia, the Arab world, and also other countries. So he was, in a sense, a universal historian, because his canvas was not narrow, it was very expansive. He was rather writing the history of the Muslim world. He was not merely writing the history of the Delhi Sultans. He was writing the history of the Muslim world and would try to locate the Delhi Sultanate in that very broad canvas. So Minhaj-us-Siraj was actually a sort of a pioneer so far as history writing in the Persian language is concerned, and so far as universal history writing is concerned. Now, Zia Barani in Tariq-e-Firoz Shahi actually started from where Minhaj-us-Siraj ends his history writing. So it's a sort of continuation of Minhaj-us-Siraj in Zia Barani. Now, Zia Barani was definitively patronized by the Delhi Sultans, but later on he had a tragic end, because Firoz Tughlaq stopped patronizing him.
So was Firoz Shah Tughlaq trying to establish a theocracy?
It's a very good question. Actually, Firoz Tughlaq wrote a small book, Futuhat-i-Firoz Shahi. That's a 32 pages book. If you read this book, it's a sort of written in an autobiographical style. He tries to project him as a sort of very devout Muslim ruler, a ruler who functions in conformity with the Sharia. But if you read between lines and if you compare this source with other available source materials of the period, you will find that he was actually trying to broaden the base of his empire. Actually, he was not trying to create a theocracy because he understood that the majority of the populations were non-Muslims. Had he been intended to create a theocracy, he would not have allowed the writing of a book on classical Hindustani music. The title of that book is Guniyatul Munia. That appeared during his reign. So had he been very orthodox, had he been inclined towards establishing a theocracy, he would not have allowed the appearance of such a book extensively dealing with Hindustani music, because orthodox elements do not like music at all. So in a sense, he was just like his predecessors. He was not more orthodox than his predecessors. He was actually trying to broaden the base of the Delhi Sultanate. That is manifested during his time through his actions, through his ideas and implementation of ideas. But he stopped his patronage to Zia Barani. Actually, broken-hearted Zia Barani took shelter in the Khanka, that is the hospice of Nizamuddin Aulia. So this is interesting. Amir Khusru was the representative of liberal Islam. He was the representative of composite culture. He was a disciple of Nizamuddin Aulia. But Zia Barani, a great historian of his time, who was writing in Persian, and he was known to be a little bit orthodox, who was functioning in conformity with the Sharia, who would expect the sultans to transform India into a theocracy, rather. But he was denounced by Firoz Tughlaq, who discontinued his patronage, and broken-hearted, he took shelter in the Khanka, that is the hospice of Nizamuddin Aulia, and he had a tragic death. He died like a poor man. So the great historian died like a poor man. He was Zia Barani. Everyone used to respect some of the most illustrious Sufi saints of that time. For example, Nizamuddin Aulia, the great Chishti Sufi saint of Delhi, who died in 1325, was universally respected by both the orthodox elements as well as the liberal elements within the Muslim community, within the nobility, within the literate people, literate community. This is important. It confirms that Sufism was very important during that time. It would be helpful if we remember the socio-economic background of the historians and poets. For example, Minhajus Siraj Juzjani was a theologian come historian. Before coming to Delhi, he was in Uch. He was serving as a principal in a Firozi madrasa, and he was appointed by Nasiruddin Kabocha, the rival of Altamash. But when Altamash defeated Nasiruddin Kabocha, Minhajus Siraj Juzjani accompanied Altamash to Delhi and served him as his court historian. So this background should be taken into consideration. He was a theologian. He was a very learned man, a great historian. But sometimes this religious background can affect the history writing of a great scholar as great as Minhajus Siraj Juzjani. For example, another example is Zia Barani. Zia Barani was also a theologian in the broad sense of the term. He was orthodox. Moreover, apart from being theologians, these two historians were being patronized by the Delhi Sultans. So when you write history after receiving direct patronage from the court, you are likely to be a little bit biased towards your immediate patron. So while reading these Persian texts as produced by Minhajus Siraj Juzjani and also Zia Barani, you have to be a little bit careful. There's a difference between Amir Khusru and Minhaj Siraj Juzjani or Zia Barani. Because he was very mystical. Amir Khusru was very mystical. And he was not a professional historian like Zia Barani. He was a Sufi poet, as you have raised this question earlier. So you will find that sometimes there is fictional element in his writing. So he is more successful as a poet, but a very liberal poet, a representative of India's composite culture, or to be more precise, Indo-Muslim culture. So here you can locate Minhajus Juzjani and also Zia Barani in one place, and also you can locate in another place the great poet, the doyen of Indian Qawwali, Amir Khusru. This is important. For example, there was another great historian who was writing during the time of Firoz Tughlaq. His book is Tariq-e Firoz Shahi. He is Afif.
Excuse me, sir, can we regard Afif's Tariq-e Firoz Shahi as the precursor of Aini-Akbari?
You are right, probably we can. For example, Afif was not merely handling the military campaigns or the political events of Firoz Shah Tughlaq's reign. He was also giving ample emphasis on the various welfare activities in which Firoz Shah Tughlaq was engaged. For example, he was thinking about the uplift of his people, he was thinking about the betterment of agriculture, irrigation and stuff. So these items were discussed. So in a sense, he can be regarded as a forerunner of Akbar or Sher Shah in terms of his welfare activities. And that is adequately discussed in Afif's book. In that sense, this book can be regarded as a precursor to Aini-Akbari of the famous Abul Fazl. So this is an important piece. And then it brings us to another great historian of this time, that is Isami. Isami's book is Futuhus Salatin, and Isami actually is a great historian.
So it is generally said that
Yes.
Isami was critical towards Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So is it true?
I think it is partly true in the sense that Isami flourished during the time of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Isami also accompanied Muhammad bin Tughlaq when Muhammad bin Tughlaq shifted his capital to Daulatabad. But he did not like this shift of capital because he had to face hardship due to this shift of capital to Daulatabad. And he was not favorably disposed towards Muhammad bin Tughlaq for this reason, for the hardship he had to suffer. And later on, when Muhammad bin Tughlaq again decided to come back to northern India from Daulatabad, Isami remained in Daulatabad and became a writer who was being patronized by the newly emerging Bahmani kingdom. So this is a manifestation. This emergence of Bahmani kingdom offered patronage to Isami, the great historian, and he received that patronage and did not accompany Muhammad bin Tughlaq to northern India. So it proves that he was not favorably disposed towards Muhammad bin Tughlaq. We have discussed adequately that firstly we have to deal with the histories mainly available in Arabic, but later on, because of the translation movements, these Arabic sources were translated into Persian and became important sources for the British Indologists, European Indologists, who translated them into European languages. Then we have the official histories, that is history writing directly patronized by the Delhi Sultans. These official histories we have earlier mentioned that they had a limitation because these historians were likely to be biased because they received direct patronage from the sultans, so they were supposed to eulogize the sultans, and they mainly dealt with the battles, the political events. And in those days, political activities had been confined to the aristocracy, to the nobility. It was not the realm of the masses. So you can understand that these people who, by receiving direct patronage from the court, who were writing history in the Persian language, they were mainly focusing on the aristocracy, on the nobility. They were not thinking about social, economic conditions, cultural conditions of the masses. So this is the limitation from which these historians, these court historians suffered. And Amir Khusru wanted to transcend this constraint by his Sufic activities, by his mystical activities, by his poetry writing. So he wanted to compensate for the loss created by this history writing by receiving direct patronage from the Delhi Sultans. He also just spilled over to this mystical experience, poetical experience. So that's why he wanted to bridge this gap between the aristocracy and the masses, and became an ardent follower of the very popular Chishti Sufi saint Nizamuddin Aulia. And for that reason, because Sufism was very popular, and Sufis were not only respected by the kings and the princes, they were also respected by the masses because they thought about the masses. They thought about the welfare of the masses. They were engaged in humanitarian activities when the masses faced any crisis. They put emphasis on human, spiritual, liberal values. This is important for the building of a nation, for the establishment of a sort of heterogeneous nation where people from representing different religious faiths, different ethnic groups, linguistic groups will have a sort of equal position in a such heterogeneous empire. So they played a significant part in that sense. So these Sufis produced a sort of literature. We have also mentioned that they produced Maktubat literature, that is the letters exchanged between Sufi saints. They also produced in the Sufi khankas or hospices. We see the emergence of a very important genre of literature, that is Malfuzat literature. You have raised questions about Malfuzat literature, that is table talk. So these discussions were written down, and these are very important social documents during the period under survey, that is the Delhi Sultanate, because these elements, these informations, materials throw light on contemporary society and culture. And history is not merely the story of the sultans or dynasties. History is not the story of the rise and fall of dynasties or rise and fall of empires. History is also the story of the common people, their day-to-day life, their feelings, their emotions, their taboos. These are all included in history. And in that sense, you have to include these unconventional sources alongside these very classical elements in history writing, that is the official sources. I hope our discussion was fruitful.